So after having graduated from UCSB with a minor in French, I really wanted to spend more time in France, though I had spent a few months in France over the summer doing the American Village program, which is an immersion English camp for French children. There's a blog post about that if you want to read more. But after I graduated, I wanted to go back. I decided to go with the TAPIF program. The TAPIF program is through the Ministry of Education. It stands for Teaching Assistant Program in France. So you are an assistant, you're not the full-time teacher, and that means that you're being plugged into the curriculum of the public school system. So which teachers you get paired up with and what classes you're in really is going to determine how much say you have in the curriculum that you're teaching. Also the age that you choose. So I was with elementary school children, which means that my job was really to get them excited about learning English, to motivate them and make them feel confident in their language learning abilities so that later when they're in middle school and high school, they would feel more comfortable and they would be more motivated to work with the more advanced curriculum that they have there. So I had a lot of choice in what I wanted to teach and what types of cultural focuses I wanted to bring into the class. My coworkers who worked with older children or older, I guess, young adults in middle school and high school had a little bit less freedom. They were more assisting the English professors, English teachers with the work that they were doing with the children instead of coming in and just doing their own work. So for me, I had most of my classes for 45 minutes, and usually the teacher would just sit in the back of the room and correct papers or whatever other work they needed to do, and I had free roam with them, which was really fun for me. The TAPIF program does bring in a lot of people from other English-speaking countries. It's not just America. They bring in people from New Zealand and Australia and Britain. I was placed in a smaller city. It was called Vichy, which is in the Clermont-Ferrand school district, essentially, would be the, the translation. Here it is. This is my district right in the center of France. So the way it works is they give you 3 top choices for a school district that you would like. And certain school districts are placed in the higher popularity ranking categories, essentially. So you can't put your top 3 school districts as Lyon, Paris, and Nice because everybody wants those. So those 3 and a couple others fall into the more popular school districts. So you can choose one from the most popular and one from the less popular and one from the even less popular. So they try to spread people out and still try to address your first or second choice as best they can. I got my second choice, so I was happy with that. I chose it mainly because it was near Lyon and near the Rhone Alps, which I had spent a little bit of time in the previous summer, so it was a place that I wanted to return to. These salary amounts are from when I was there, which was in 2014, so they may have changed. I do not believe they have, but as always, check their website for the most current up-to-date information. This is the salary that I got, and then that is listed there as well. And this is not taking into account the money that I got from the CAF, which is essentially a social safety net in France that people who are earning less money, they can have money given to them by the French government specifically for housing. So I was given almost 85 to 90% of my housing money by the government. So though I had to find my own place, housing's not provided by the program. I found a room to rent in Vichy, and though I had to find that and coordinate it and pay it myself, the government did give me some money towards it. So that really helped out a lot, and that wasn't particular to the TAPIF program. That was available to anyone working in France and earning under a certain amount. So the program lasts for 7 months. It's not the entire French, school year. It's just 7 months. And another thing to note about France is that they have a lot of school breaks. So in that 7 months, for me, it worked out to be that I was working about 6 weeks, and then I would get about 2 weeks off. And you get the same stipend every month, no matter what. So it was often possible that I would only work 24 hours in a month and get the same stipend, which was great. Gave me time to travel, and the children always come back from the vacations, very refreshed. They get plenty of time off, which is, I think, really healthy for children to have time away from school. I worked in multiple schools, so on certain days I would have actually classes on opposite sides of town that I would take the bus in between to teach in. But I always got Fridays off, and I think that I'm not sure if they guarantee, but they close to guarantee you having either Friday or Monday off, because they know that people coming here are young and they want to travel in Europe and they want to have 3-day weekends. So they're really, really helpful with that. So I always had Fridays off. I had 3-day weekends, and I did take advantage of that. I was able to take the train to Lyon and actually go to places like Madrid just for a quick 3-day weekend trip. So I definitely recommend saving up some money so that you can travel. Don't spend it all on croissants every day. And that being said, I didn't do any outside work except for this, but knowing what I know now about online teaching, if I were to do it again, I definitely would be doing some online teaching on the side to make some extra money, because I had plenty of free time. I worked 12 hours a week in the classroom, but of course there's lesson planning time outside of that. The way that I did it is I would pick a topic for a week, essentially a topic that I knew would work with different ages. So often I would use cultural things like holidays. Holidays are one of my favorite things to teach because they are particular. Even if you have the same holiday, the way that you celebrate it is usually particular to your country. So I would pick a holiday, and then I would devise a lesson plan. I would pick out my vocabulary and everything I wanted to use. Usually I would pick out about no more than 5 vocabulary words, even for the higher levels. So I had 1st to 5th graders, and I did have one kindergarten class as well that was just a 30-minute class. So I would pick out about 5 vocabulary words and 1 verb that I felt went with those vocabulary words that we would focus on for the week. Then I would split that lesson plan, that general lesson plan, into 2 different levels of the lesson plan. And from there, I would even tailor it a little bit more to the specific level, but generally I could get away with having 2 sets of the lesson and 2 sets of different types of worksheets and all of that with the different levels that I had in elementary school. You do have to speak French to apply to this program, but even if you don't speak French, what I would say is still pay attention to what I'm saying, because it is important for other European programs that are pretty similar, especially Spain. The program through the Ministry of Education in Spain, the I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish actually, so the Auxiliary program in Spain is very, very similar to this, but how much Spanish you have to speak is kind of dubiously outlined. If you can get through the process, then you're probably okay. Where with this program, you either have to have a university instructor vouch for you, or you have to take a French test to prove your competency in French, essentially. They want to find people who are really devoted to French culture and to France and aren't just applying to any old country to teach English in. They do want you to care about France before you come. As I said, you have the choice of elementary or secondary. I chose elementary, and this is a picture of Vichy. This was the main river in Vichy, and I would walk along here all the time and watch the changing seasons, which we don't really have here in California, so that was exciting. And on the right, you can see some fun pastries that I had in Vichy. And there's no shortage of pastry shops and cafes to hang out in and have Nutella hot chocolate and interesting new pastries. So don't be surprised if you have to purchase some new pants while you're there that fit. Oh, this is basically how I would come up with all my lessons. I would just think about what I loved about American culture. whether it be the snacks. As you can see, I have the United States of snacks here, and I did actually bring back some snacks when I came to the US for Christmas. I brought some snacks back with me, including peppermint candy, which they had never had, and some of them spit out, and some of them said that it was hurting their mouths too much, but it was still fun. Disney was not as popular as I expected it to be, so you can't really count on that, but I talked about it a little bit. The Simpsons is actually much more popular in France than I expected. They love The Simpsons. It's perfect for doing a lesson on family because they're already familiar with that family structure, and they were just so excited to get to talk about Simpsons while at school. That was such such an easy way to engage them, was just to bring in Simpsons. I also brought a couple of books with me that I knew I could build whole lessons around, and I did, especially Hungry Caterpillar. That's perfect because it has fruits and it has days of the week, and it's visual, and it's really a cultural book for us in the US. Like, everybody knows this book, so it was cool to be able to explore it with them. As I said, holidays were my go-to. I would just look at the month and see what was coming up, and we would start learning, any songs associated with those holidays, any strange customs that we have. A lesson I learned quickly was to run these things by my French friends before, because when I tried to talk about Valentine's Day with the children, they were absolutely mortified because it is not for children, and it doesn't mean friendship in France. It is strictly for adults, and it is romantic. So that was the next thing that we talked about. We talked about how it's different in the US and in France, and that's okay. So I made a line on the board, and I said, okay, let's talk about everything that you know about Valentine's Day here in France. And we listed it on the right, and on the left I said, okay, this is USA side, and I'm going to tell you about it. There, it's for children, it's for anyone, and it's just about friendship, and you can bring in, Valentine's for your friends, and you share candy and all of that. Pop stars are a good go-to. I had several students who were obsessed with Rihanna. So they are, in France, at least in my experience, they were pretty familiar with that. I'm not as much of a sports person, so I didn't bring that in, but I'm sure that they would be interested in hearing about it, though maybe not familiar with the sports that we play here. I know that they're not familiar with baseball because I have tried to play baseball with French children, and it doesn't come naturally to them. They've never watched it growing up, so they're not sure what to do. These are a few pictures of my one of my schools. This was the outside area, the view outside of the window, and then on the left you can see the classroom. These are my recommendations for no prep games to keep in your back pocket at all times. Often, it rains outside, and the kids are just going a little crazy that day for some reason, and you can't get everyone to settle down, and they're a little bit squirmy in their seats because they're young. And so on days like that, you need to have something that can get them up out of their seats, that is competitive, that they will want to be part of, not just a worksheet or just a lesson or reading or something like that. So having these in the back pocket or in your bag at all times, I think really is a lifesaver, especially when you start a lesson and then it goes much quicker than you expected. That happened to me quite often. The students would just finish the worksheet, and I expected that they would have trouble with it, and they didn't. So my recommendation is to have the supplies for these types of games just with you at all times. So for bingo, you can just print out basically a table, like a spreadsheet table, and have it cut up so that every student would get one little, a small table essentially, and then they would be able to write in the words or draw, if they're younger, in the pictures of the vocab that you're doing bingo with. And then you put all of the little slips of paper that you already have, as I said, flashcards and labels. The labels, you put all of those in a bag, and you pull one out at a time, and you're playing bingo. There you go. Simon says this one's great because you really don't have to have any type of materials. You just have to have the creativity to be able to come up with an action for each of the words you are doing. So it's easy when you're practicing verbs, but sometimes if you want to get creative, you can also practice the the maybe nouns or even adjectives that you're teaching that day. So Simon Says is pretty adaptable, and in France they have the same game essentially, and I'm pretty sure in Korea and China they also have the same type of game. So this is, though it may go by different names, they may already be familiar with the game, which helps because it's, as I said, if they're already a little bit distracted, explaining the rules to a game is only going to be is only going to be more difficult for them to focus on. So if it's something they're already familiar with, it's easy to just get into. Pictionary is great. They seem to pick this one up pretty quick, and I would use the labels from all past lessons that we had thus far. So I would keep all the flashcards and the labels in my bag, and then all of the aggregate labels I would be able to draw on for Pictionary. And the ones that were, of course, appropriate. Sometimes there are certain verbs that would be very difficult for them to draw, but they, yeah, you have them come up to the front of the room, you split the class into 2 teams, and you keep a tally of whether they were able to guess what the person was drawing on each side, so they each get points, and you set a timer for however long you want, 30 seconds. I usually did about 45 seconds, and then they draw, and only one side of the team is allowed to guess. They get a point if they get it in time. Hangman, they were also familiar with Hangman. They have a similar game in France. This one's fun because you can have them do it, and they can just, write however many letters they think the word is, and I would usually check with them to make sure that they had the right amount of letters on the board for the word that they were trying to do in English. But that's a really fun one to get them up there to be leading the game. And you can do this with Simon Says as well, actually. Often I would be Simon for a while, and then I would pick someone else to be Simon, and they tell everyone, they give the commands. Flashcards and labels, these are a pretty integral part of all of my lessons, but you can also use them for any type of game you can think of, really. You can mix them up on the board, and they have to put the appropriate labels on the appropriate flashcard, or put them around the room, and they have to go to the right spot, do a little scavenger hunt. Anything you can think of, really, you can do with flashcards. So I was teaching younger learners, and of course there are benefits and challenges with every group of learners. So for me, I prefer it because they're willing to be silly with me, and they're willing to be animated, and do Simon Says and make all of the animal noises, the farm animal noises that I say, where maybe adults are not quite as willing to be so engaged in the games that I come up with. They also are very competitive, which I find really helpful in engaging them in the lesson. So if you break them into 2 teams, the class into 2 teams, and you start recording points, they don't really know or care what those points are for, but they want them. And adults are like this too, to a certain extent, but they're a little bit even more engaged in those types of competitive activities. So as I said, it makes it easier because they're willing to sing all these silly songs with you. They're maybe, kind of repetitive and sound like nursery rhymes, where adults maybe wouldn't want to sing nursery rhymes. Kids they're fine with it. They'll play charades. They always volunteer. I always had so many hands go up when I asked for someone to come up to the front to be an example with me, or to play a game with me, where my colleagues who were teaching older school students said it was like pulling teeth to get someone to try to volunteer to do anything. So that was easier. And some of the challenging things are that as I said, they get squirmy. Their attention spans are just, they're not as long. They don't have that kind of metacognition where they're going, okay, I am here to learn, and I am going to apply myself, and I have to remember that I need to know these vocab words for this test. They don't have that that voice in the back of their head that's kind of giving them the discipline to sit still and pay attention. Also, they just don't have this broad cultural or just a broad knowledge of science and things like that maybe adults do, and so it's easier for you to explain a concept to them because they've already studied it in their native language. So maybe with the children you're talking to, you may not know whether or not they've already learned about this kind of cultural topic until you try to explain it to them, and then realize that you're doing double duty. You're explaining something that they haven't learned yet in school, and you're doing it in a foreign language. So that came up for me a few times where I realized they just actually didn't understand that concept. And I had to kind of jump ship on that because it was too complicated for me to try to explain to them without using French. That's another thing. I didn't use any French when I was in the class. I didn't want them to know that I spoke French so that they wouldn't be lazy, and they wouldn't just speak to me in French and not make the effort to speak in English. So that helped because they would, confer with their friends. And I wasn't strict about there being no French allowed in the classroom. I was okay with them having that kind of cooperative learning environment where they felt like they could talk to another student to find the correct word to use with me, and then come back to me and say, oh, it's this. That was what I wanted to encourage. I wanted them to work as teams, so I was fine with them using French. Of course, I encouraged them to use English as much as possible, but if they needed to use French, they could. But I didn't let on that I understood any of it. Tips and tricks. So on the left, you can see some fun little drawings that these students made for me, which I loved. None of them could remember how to spell my name, so I got a lot of different variations. You can see the illustrations are actually from our Halloween topic. So we've got a witch on a broomstick and a ghost and a jack-o'-lantern and some trick-or-treaters. I believe they're going off to the house to trick-or-treat. I think those are trick-or-treaters. So my main tips and tricks are to follow the child. Don't let your kind of ideas of what the lesson should look like get in the way of their learning. You're there to help them learn. So if you think that these are the learning objectives for today, and we should never bring anything else out. We don't have time to talk about anything else. Unless you're teaching to a really strict test, then maybe that's not really the most beneficial thing for them. I come from a Montessori background, so I kind of incorporate that ideology into my teaching of a second language. So I think that their natural curiosity should be really central to the learning experience. So they're going to be naturally curious about the culture and everything. If you're doing your job right, they should be curious. And so following that and allowing that that point of inspiration to guide the lesson and go off topic and learn about a new fun thing you hadn't expected to talk about, I think that is really beneficial for the children to see that you're really responsive to them. You're not just up there saying your spiel and going home. You're there talking to them, connecting with them, finding out what piques their interest. Additionally, always have a backup exercise. That kind of calls back to those games I was talking about, but it also can be worksheets and things like that. A lot of times I had extra worksheets that were just kind of fun. They were English-based, but just fun things for people who finished lessons quickly. Same thing goes with backup copies. Sometimes there are people who finish right away and do everything perfect, and there are people who, by the end of it, there's not one blank that isn't covered in whiteout, 4 different times on 4 different layers of whiteout. And I had a kid that was close to tears one time because she was just so frustrated that her paper was very wasn't very neat by the end of it. And so luckily I had a backup copy. I just said, here you go, start fresh. But I did have to learn that lesson to have backup copies. Keep it simple. So this goes for your speech, especially if you are not using their native language at all, as I was. Just have your few sentences that you pick out and stick to them for the whole time you're teaching them. The whole, every week, try to come back and build on those sentences. But if you really think about it beforehand, you think about how you're going to teach this lesson. What are you going to say? What verbs are you going to use? What sentence structure do you want to use? Think about it beforehand and maybe make some notes about what you want to use. And that way you can come back to it and say, what did I decide I wanted to, how did I decide I wanted to explain this? Which verb did I want to use? Did I want to use place or put in this situation? Okay, that's right, this. So if you want to kind of keep tabs on that, you can, or just keep it in mind. But do keep in mind that pretty much if you're working with the level that I was, every word that you say, you're going to need to explain. And you can explain it with other words because often they don't have those other words in their knowledge bank. So just be ready to draw and act out every little thing that you want them to do. Be very animated and keep things as simple as possible. You can play to your strengths in this area. So if you're, this kind of goes back to the choice of cultural references you wanna use. So as I said, I'm not that into sports, so I wasn't gonna really have that be a topic of conversation. Additionally, I really like to create creative like games and stuff like that. So we did a lot of games in our class. I know some people maybe are a little bit more creative as far as crafts go. So maybe they would do more crafts with a kid, that kind of stuff. I took notes. I took copious notes on my classes, and every single one I had bullet points. When I was waiting for the bus outside, I would just write down everything that had happened in that class, so that in the future, I could, before the next class with that group, I could come back and see what we had talked about, because often we do go off topic and learn about something new. And maybe I want to incorporate that into other classes, but I don't want to talk about it again with the same class. Or one class is, has already finished their worksheet, and one of them we didn't even get to it. So keeping those notes from the get-go is probably going to save you a lot of hassle down the road when you show up with a worksheet you think that they haven't done and they've already done it, or something, something along those lines could happen. Always run through a practice group with a volunteer, a practice round with a volunteer as a group. So I did this for every little thing, every worksheet, every activity, every game we played. I always ran through with 1 or 2 students in front of the group before everyone else was able to participate. So for example, I posted underneath this recording, you can see in the document viewer, there's a worksheet that I created to go with the Hungry Caterpillar. And there's a picture of the fruit and the day of the week. And they're meant to draw a line to match those. Before I even handed these worksheets out to them, because if you hand the worksheets out to them, they will start on them. They don't care if they know what they're supposed to do on those worksheets. They will just start circling and writing, and then they get upset, and good thing you had backup copies. But to avoid that, don't give them the worksheet yet. What I would do is I would start drawing the fruits on the board and essentially replicating the worksheet I was about to hand out to them. I would draw one fruit at a time. What is this fruit? What is this fruit? That's right. Who likes this fruit? Oh, do you like it? You don't like it? All that conversation as you're going. I would draw each of the fruits, and then I would ask someone to help me, with the days of the week, and I would write that on the board next to it. And then I would have a student come up, and I would read through the book, and I would say, okay, you have to listen to the book, listen to the story, and write and match the fruit with the day of the week when I say it. So they would, stand up there, and everyone would kind of listen with them, listen to the story. They would draw the lines on the board. Good job. He or she gets to sit down. I erase that from the board. Then I hand out the worksheets, and I guarantee they hadn't memorized it. So I handed out the worksheets, and then we did it again as a group. I did that with everything, like I said, even games, Pictionary, anything like that. I would compete against them just to start, me against one person, all that kind of stuff. It's really helpful to do a practice round first with the group. Okay, well, thank you very much for listening in, and feel free to send me any questions via the contact form about my time in France. As I said, this is pretty similar to the program in Spain, the ministerial program. So a lot of the things that I said here apply to teaching in that program as well.